But yeah, today's first story and where we are going to start. Before we get back to the Donroe Doctrine, before we get back to Cold War era CIA tactics, COINTELPRO, and other stories such as that, we're going to start with new details emerging from a Washington Post report about the attempted assassination plot that was uncovered by Israeli intelligence when Donald Trump was in Ankara for the summit. Donald Trump was in Ankara for a NATO summit, and there was a little switcheroo that took place. Change of flight plans. There was a security concern. Now, of course, during this summit, there was also conversations taking shape with Iran. And what's interesting, of course, is those conversations went nowhere. Part of the speculation right now is that Israel is manipulating Donald Trump by way of consistently weaponizing, at best, faulty intelligence that signals to Trump that his life is in imminent danger in the hands of the Iranian assassins. This is actually something that we should be paying a little bit more attention to, I think, because a lot of talk, a lot of conversations have been had about Lindsey Graham, about Benjamin Netanyahu's personal influence over Donald Trump. But some of those conversations have not really reckoned with how much this personal animus comes from the fact that Donald Trump has consistently assumed that Iran wants to assassinate him. That's what's really interesting about this. I think that has to be a personal motivation of Donald Trump a little bit. Aside from the victory lap that he thought he would take in the aftermath of the successful and expedient Venezuela operation, and how he would carry over that swift victory into Iran, I think there's also another factor to consider, which is the idea that since the Qasem Soleimani assassination and Trump won, Donald Trump has always been fearful of an Iranian assassination attempt. And I suspect that Israel is weaponizing that fear, which is not invalid, right? It's not entirely invalid. It's not entirely an unfounded fear. But I do think that Israeli intelligence is weaponizing that fear in an effort to drive a wedge between Trump and any possible successful negotiation. This is yet another instance. Let's take a look.
We are learning new details of that possible threat that forced President Trump to suddenly change planes in Turkey last month. All this amid questions about why Air Force One was allowed to take off with so many people on board, not knowing they were in danger. Nancy Cordes is at the White House with the latest on this. Nancy, it's a question I keep asking myself every day. The Secret Service really living up to the name secret. What are people saying now?
What we're learning now, Gail, is that the thing that they were initially worried about, this Iranian plot, may not have been as much as it seemed. U.S. officials tell us now that they first learned about the possibility of an Iranian plot just about a day before they executed this complex ruse to quietly move President Trump from Air Force One to the other plane in a catering truck. And U.S. officials say they received intelligence about an Iranian team in Turkey tasked with firing a surface-to-air missile at Air Force One with President Trump on board. That sounds incredibly alarming. The intel came from multiple sources, including the NSA, the CIA, and Turkish intelligence. But U.S. officials say they investigated quickly and ultimately did not detect any such Iranian team on the ground. By that point, however, both Air Force One and the military jet carrying the president had already left Turkey.
I need you guys to understand something. Why would Iran do this? I mean, look, does Iran want revenge? Do they say death to America all the time? Absolutely. Do they actually have placards up with crosshairs on Donald Trump's face? Certainly. But what do we know about Iran, the Iranian leadership, including the hardliners? What do we know about how they operate? We know that they are very strategic, right? They've, I think, more than proven that they are capable of behaving in a way that is unbelievably restrained, regardless of how much vengeance drives them, how much vengeance motivates them. Because it's clear, like our actions in Iran through perfidy twice, not once, but twice, especially the second time with the assassination, the decapitation of the entire leadership, both in the IRGC and the Ayatollah, the supreme leader. This was a real blow. This was a real moral wound, especially the Manab school. The Manab school strikes really changed the dynamic of this conflict, I believe. So yes, they are absolutely invested in revenge. Make no mistake. I will, however, say this. I think they're very strategic, and they have shown time and time again that they are very restrained. So it makes zero sense for the Iranians right now, when they have maximum leverage, over not only the Strait of Hormuz, but maximum leverage over the Bab el-Mandeb Strait by way of the Ansar Allah movement in Yemen, when they have maximum leverage over dictating the pacing of the conflict, unlike ever before, as they can open up new lines of attack towards American installations in Jordan, where they could technically start lobbing missiles at Israel once again if they chose to do so, at a time when the American stockpiles have diminished. Iran has maximum leverage that they're not even deploying right now. They're just maintaining it. There is no reason for them to try and assassinate Donald Trump. There's no reason for them to actually even successfully assassinate Donald Trump, because the reality of the matter is this would probably cause Iran to get nuked. And they don't want to get nuked, right? This has never happened before. Never happened before. There's never been a moment where, well, I guess you could say JFK, but we don't know who did it, right? But there's never been an instance where like a foreign government openly assassinates the American president. Openly being the key word, right? Openly. So for that reason, we don't know what the American contingency plans look like. And I don't think Iran would risk that, especially because I don't think Iran would risk that right now, especially considering that they have established primacy over the Strait of Hormuz. They've crippled the entire global energy supply. They hold all the cards right now. America knows it. Americans know it. And increasingly, as days go by, more and more people are coming to terms with that reality. So there's not really any investment into this wild card initiative of trying to assassinate Donald Trump. Always reading AI generated slop? What do you mean? Question mark? Who are you talking about? The Trump administration, or are you talking about me? I guess technically, if you mean like I'm reading AI generated slop because I'm reading bots like yourself in the chat. But the point I'm trying to make is this. There's nothing to gain strategically from even attempting to assassinate Donald Trump, or even assassinating successfully Donald Trump, and so much to lose in the process, right? These are the reasons why I don't believe that this assassination attempt was a real valid concern, and more so one that was elevated by the Israeli intelligence, as they've also openly admitted, right? To possibly manipulate Donald Trump into viewing the Iranian side with even more scrutiny and more hatred.
That President Trump was not the only person who was secretly transferred off of Air Force One and onto that airport catering truck to get to the military plane. Sources say he was accompanied by his deputy chief of staff, Dan Scavino, his assistant, Natalie Harp, and the director.
Bro, where did this lady come from? Does anyone know Natalie Harp's background? Because, like, I see her in every photo now, and I have no idea where she came from. She was not, I don't think she was around during Trump 1, and she is always around her. She is always behind her, always, and has this, like, weird aura of evil. She was literally just an obsessed fan. Yeah, I don't know. She scours the internet for truth posts. That Natalie chick, I wonder how much she's getting for getting with Trump. Yeah, I think she's like, she's the new bag man, right? And I love that they don't know what her birthday is. Like Wikipedia says born 1990 or 1991, which is very strange to me as well. It's like, that's weird. How is this person, how is the executive assistant to the president such a non-entity that we don't know anything about? I doubt her real name is Natalie Harp. What is going on here? She garnered attention after praising President Donald Trump for signing into law a federal right to try law that she said saved her life. Trump invited Harp to serve as a member of the advisory board in his 2020 presidential campaign and to speak at the 2020 Republican National Convention. Harp worked for the television channel One America News Network from 2020 to 2022. She later became an aide for Trump, exerting influence over his communications. Another one of these Liberty University goons, Liberty University MBA, who went on Fox in 2019 saying Trump's right to try law cured her bone cancer. Experts told the Washington Post the story didn't add up. She got an RNC slot out of it and then a show on One American News Network. And now she's his executive assistant, aka the human printer, who trails him with a portable printer, feeding him nice articles about himself. Her dad committed suicide the year that she started working for Trump. That's also very weird. Yeah, this is the human printer, as they call her. The voted aide who keeps good news flowing will follow Trump to the White House. Natalie Harp, a 33-year-old former anchor on a right-wing cable show, is poised to become the gatekeeper for information to and from the president. We've seen her.
Okay, so we know the Natalie Harp girl, right?
We've seen
the
her
girl
in some documentaries as well. I think her background requires a little bit more of a deep dive. So I like that they say born in 1990 or 1991. Here it says Natalie Harp was born in 1991 to a devoutly Christian family. Her father was an estate agent who founded a consultancy for travel companies. He died by suicide in July 2020. Harp graduated from Point Loma Nazarene University in 2012 and from Liberty University in 2015 with a master's in with an MBA. And I guess she is 1990 instead of 1991, if that's the case, because she graduated, her undergrad graduation is 1 year prior to mine, and I'm a 91 baby, so. Yeah, Liberty University. Apparently, she would write letters to Trump saying things like, "You are all that matters to me." The woman with the laptop in this photo is Trump's executive assistant, Natalie Hart. Perhaps you remember her as the woman Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan heavily implied as Trump's current mistress in a pair of 2024 New York Times stories. Harp's brother, for whom she is estranged, has called her relationship with the president unhealthy and referred to her as Trump's fan club, according to an independent article. I just think there's something weird going on there, man.
Who everyone calls like the human printer, Donald Trump's hospice nurse, his professional diaper changer, all of these things, right? Yes, that's not good enough for me. I need to know more. Natalie Hart, I did a little digging. So first of all, her job history is like kind of funny with the whole narrative that she is like the president's hospice nurse. So before Natalie became Donald Trump's sidekick, she worked at St. Agnes Medical Center as a medical scribe. She worked as a youth counselor at STARS Behavioral Health Group. She's worked as an air quality inspector at an air pollution control district. And she has worked as an emergency medical technician at American Ambulance. But like, that's not all. And this is where it gets kind of weird. So in 2013, around that era, Natalie Hart began working at a company that was founded by her father in 2000 called the Global Hotel Network. And like their website's just like generally a little bit bizarre. The company markets itself as like a networking platform for hotel executives, developers, investors, and major hospitality brands. And it's a place where industry leaders can publish articles, interviews, and promotional content. Like it's not a hotel chain itself, it's like a networking hub for people who are in this industry. And like I said, it was founded by...
I think so much of the United States of America's economy revolves around these like fake industries. Like just a networking hub. You're like, who is this for? How does this make money? And it's just a sequence of different grifts and cons. I mean, think about Patrick Bet-David, right? Like before he launched his media empire and phenomenal fashion line, iconic fashion line, really, alongside his media empire, before he became Mr. Valuetainment himself, like what was he doing? He was doing a multi-level marketing scheme that required him to do business seminars. And he, I think, still continues to do those business seminars as well, regardless of his newfound fame as being a lion and possibly the new Ayatollah, the new supreme leader of the Islamic Republic. So much of the American economy is geared towards just a bunch of fucking con men trying to continue new low-level grifts, mid-level grifts, and sometimes even high-level grifts. It's very strange.
Natalie Harp's father, Robert Harp, in 2000. And she worked for that company for a little bit in 2013. What's very interesting and caught my attention is a member on the advisory board of Natalie Harp's father's company, the Global Hotel Network, is a man named Eric Danziger. Eric Danziger is the former CEO of Trump Hotels. And Donald Trump and his hotels are heavily promoted through the Global Hotel Network. Here is a full list of the advisory board members of the Global Hotel Network company. And as you can see, Eric.
Yeah, I mean, that is 90% of South Florida's economy. That and cryptocurrency, NFTs, and whatever new grift will take root. Very strange stuff. Did you see that you and Luigi both have sexy pics on Drudge Report today? No, I didn't see
Danziger is on there, amongst many other very wealthy and powerful CEOs and hotel chain owners. So there's a connection between Natalie Harp's father and Donald Trump's business interests that go back many, many, many years. Now, Natalie Harp's father, Robert Harp, passed away at the age of 61 in July of 2020. And all that we know is he passed away unexpectedly in his home. The month after Natalie Harp's father passed away, Donald Trump invited Natalie to speak at the RNC. Later that month, Donald Trump invited her to be a part of his advisory board for his 2020 presidential campaign, and she accepted. The rest is history. They've basically been inseparable since then. So I don't really know what to do with any of that information, but I feel feel like it helps me understand Natalie Harp a little bit more, outside from simply knowing that she came from a devout Christian family, went to Liberty University, and is known as Donald Trump's hospice nurse.
Natalie Harp is looking for a replacement father figure, which is why she turned to Trump, her brother reveals. Jesus Christ, dude. What a strange situation this is. I mean, I guess this is always like this kind of stuff has always existed in American politics. I mean, Bill Clinton, obviously JFK. This kind of stuff has always been a prominent fixture of American politics. It's just that I think that they like these kinds of strange relationships never were as prominent, and they didn't come like they weren't as impactful, right? If that makes sense. Like, it's not like, it's not as though Bill Clinton's nefarious sex scandals in the White House before they were revealed were impactful on like actual policy or the output. Same with JFK, right? As far as I understand, I don't think they dictated American domestic policy or American foreign policy. And perhaps Natalie Harp also doesn't have that same level of influence. Now, having said that, let's get back to the top story that I was covering, the assassination attempt on Trump's secret flight. So here's what happened. Donald Trump gets on. Initially, Donald Trump's supposed to fly back from Ankara, Turkey's capital, to the United States of America on his new Air Force One jet that he got from Qatar. But this new Air Force One jet from Qatar, of course, was it had to be retrofitted. It had to get all of the bells and whistles that are necessary for Air Force One. But that development process requires a tremendous amount of work and a tremendous amount of time, right? And of course, Donald Trump wanted the Qatari jet immediately. It's a massive jet. It's much larger than the regular Air Force One, right? And of course, Boeing did not have enough time to equip the Qatari Air Force One with all of the bells and whistles, the anti-air defense systems, things of that nature. So it was not sufficiently like it basically is the Air Force that he wants to use, but unfortunately it doesn't have all the bells and whistles, all the tools that would make it up to standard, that would fit the standard of Air Force One. So it's a less secure civilian aircraft, right? So Donald Trump decides he's not going to use the Qatari jet. This is what we know initially. What we know is Trump decides to send the Qatari Air Force One to the British Royal Air Force Base, and he is planning on flying back from Ankara to the British Royal Air Force Base in the old Air Force One. Yeah, Air Force One is a purpose-built airframe. It takes years to reinforce and modify. Yeah, and there's also a lot of tools that it comes with. So initially, reporters actually find that odd, right? Reporters are like, New York Times reporters actually cover the story. They talk about how Trump is actually swapping out the Qatari Air Force One for the older version that's more secure. And Trump actually sends subpoenas to those New York Times reporters. There's obviously a code of conduct with the White House press pool. For those of you who don't know, the White House press pool follows Trump everywhere. They are the civilian observers, the civilian witnesses of everything that the president is doing. So there have been plenty of instances where the White House press pool that accompanies the president everywhere will sign, an ode to secrecy, or there will be an embargo on certain kinds of information around Trump's travel or the president's travel. And then they'll reveal it afterwards once the travel is over, because obviously there's a national security concern. This has happened with Joe Biden when he went to Ukraine and they were on that train going into Kyiv. And obviously the White House press pool accompanied him on that journey, and they didn't reveal some of the details of that journey in an effort to maintain a level of security. Right? There's a security protocol around it. So in the past, like the White House press pool is, of course, always abided by this standard of security. And what's interesting here is there is something that is unprecedented with what Donald Trump did. So we're going to get into that now. So basically what happens is Trump gets on the plane with the White House press pool, with all of his aides and with, all these other people. He gets on the older Air Force One jet. And for all intents and purposes, people on the flight, including the White House press pool, think that Donald Trump is on that plane, right? Donald Trump then, of course, as we knew it at the time, flies on that plane, and the White House lands in the Royal Air Force Base in England, and then gets out of that plane alongside after the White House press pool leaves the plane. He gets off the plane. He publicly gets on the Qatari Air Force One and then flies back to the United States of America. So that's what we knew. Now, the one element that was strange in that process, there he is. Here's the video of him literally boarding the plane. They make a big show of it, right? But the one thing that was strange about this process was that the White House demanded that everyone on board this flight lower their window shades. Okay? The only other time, according to Maggie Haberman, the only other time that they've made this demand is when they were flying into Iraq, right? And it's understandable to do that in for operational security. I assume that these, when you're going into conflict zones, Air Force One is probably trying to land in the dark, so they have to close their shades. It's for OPSEC, right? It makes sense. You don't want any lights from inside of the plane to be caught on optics. It makes sense. So that was interesting that they demand to lower the window shades. It's in broad daylight. It's not dark, right? So they follow along. Later, we find out that Donald Trump wasn't on this plane at all. He got on the plane publicly, right, at the Esenboğa Airport in Ankara, in Turkey, right? And the plane is on the tarmac. Door closes. There's an airport catering truck on the side of the plane. The media boards the plane as the airport catering truck pulls away. Okay? Here's the staircase to the C-32A that's on the other side of the tarmac. And as the media is boarding this plane, thinking that Donald Trump is on the plane, it turns out Donald Trump was actually inside of this airport catering truck. So what ended up happening is Donald Trump secretly got on the plane and then through the delivery mechanism got into the airport catering truck. Now, we found out about all of this recently. The airport catering truck pulls in to the rear of the C-32A, which is the other plane. And Donald Trump gets on the other plane, leaving the White House press pool and numerous staffers on board Air Force One as bait. Straight up like with the assumption that this is a valid assassination attempt, Donald Trump basically sent the entire White House press pool, if this was a real assassination attempt on the president's life, Donald Trump basically said, fuck you. He said, sayonara, see you later. And got on a separate plane. This is objectively hilarious. I cannot deny it. I think it's also extra funny because he delivered this interview on the plane that day where he was talking about assassination attempts against him, right? This is when he was coming into Ankara.
Well, I have a threat all the time. I'm number one on their list before you. But if I go, you go, right?
But was there a specific
so perhaps someday you want to change professions. What do you have, Daniel?
Yeah. He says, if I go, you go. So perhaps you maybe one day want to change professions. That is hilarious. For your information, Walt Nauta was the security IT guy who helped Trump shuffle the classified docs between his properties and hide them. Yeah. It's his cadre of loyalists, his peak loyalists that he brought on to the second flight. Do you remember this lady who was on the plane? Is it Laura Loomer?
Good evening. I'm Natalie Harp, a formerly forgotten American from California.
Jesus Christ. New York Times has delivered like 10 email headlines about this to my inbox as though it's the biggest story right now and I can't get over how much they're freaking out about it. Am I crazy or this is just a weird thing, but otherwise not that big of a deal since nothing actually happened? Yeah, no, it's not that big of a deal, but I think it gives you insight into Trump's fascinating mind, and that's exactly the kind of story that New York Times loves, especially considering that their journalists were directly put in danger through this process, and that's also the other reason why they're going to talk about it nonstop. Trump to Marco Rubio before getting on a food cart to head to a separate plane in Turkey.
Oh! They expect one of us in the wreckage, brother.
Yep. Trump left Marco Rubio and top aides on Air Force One as he secretly fled the Iranian threat. It's also exactly the type of story that is, that's perfect to needle Trump with over and over again, because you can like present this as Trump being a pussy, right? Like, I think the Trump loyalists will look at this and go, nope, that's my president. Who cares? Who cares if his top aides die? We have to protect the president. Look how cool this story is. It's espionage. But I think New York Times and like these liberal institutions can keep needling him over and over again by calling him a pussy. And this is exactly the type of thing that Trump hates. So I think that's the other reason why they're doing this. They're really hammering on this message. I'm more so fascinated with this story because I think that there's a second layer to it that the Washington Post reporters obviously revealed by way of the intelligence community that turned around and leaked details to Washington Post about the veracity of the assassination attempt claims and where those claims came from initially. They said it was the Israeli intelligence that delivered this information to the American intelligence community, and American intelligence found these claims to be not so credible. That's the problem here.
We're the deplorable choir.
Okay, stop. We're not doing that right now. Anyway, let's continue.
Oval Office operations, Walt Nauta. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth met them on the military plane and flew with the president from Turkey to England. Among those who stayed behind on the original Air Force One, some names you'll recognize: Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller. Some of the people on Air Force One knew that the president had switched planes, and some didn't.
Right, Nancy, thank you so much.
Israel had passed along some intelligence which suggested a specific threat from Iran targeting Air Force One, a threat involving a shoulder-fired missile.
Optics like this is catnip for the wine moms and hashtag resist libs, while the CIA intel infighting is for the real heads. Exactly. Our interest in this story revolves around the fact that, one, Israel is constantly sending intelligence, whether it's faulty, whether it's real or not, it doesn't matter. But Israel is constantly sending intelligence to the Trump administration directly. And this intelligence is probably playing a role in the way that Trump sees the world. It's probably playing a role in the way that Trump sees the possible deal making with Iran, right? And I also find it fascinating that different factions within the intelligence community have had enough of Israeli interference and are straight up leaking information to the media. That, I think, is also an important factor at play here. Clearly, as I've talked about before, the CIA has different factions inside of it. This is a bureaucracy. The State Department has different factions inside of it. Obviously, every single person working in the American State Department is working in unison when it comes to maintaining American supremacy, right? American hegemony. However, some in the State Department and some in different factions inside of the intelligence community, whether it be in the NSA, whether it be the CIA, whether it be different departments, have recognized that Israel is now an impediment to American supremacy. Israel is becoming an increasingly larger force that is at odds with the American strategy in the Middle East. And that's what's going on. And it does seem like the side that has seen Israel as a liability, some of which have left the State Department famously under the Biden administration even, and certainly under Trump as well. But the side that is the factions that see Israel as a liability in the CIA, in the State Department, are getting increasingly more agitated as time goes on. And this, of course, creates a unique media environment for the real heads, for those who are actually wondering where this will go, because they're just going to yap more and more to the media. This is something that happened in Trump 1 a lot more frequently than it has happened in Trump 2. If you remember, leakers were a huge issue for the Trump administration in Trump 1. Part of the reason for that was because Trump was unbelievably incompetent, and Trump 1 actually had a lot more competent servants, like competent public servants that would look to the crazy things that he was doing and go, this is unacceptable. We have to put an end to this. And then they all became, MSNBC contributors and former Trump administration officials that became never Trump Republicans or never Trump liberals, or former Republican liberals. But there have been a lot less leakers in the second Trump administration. And part of that is because Trump decided we're doing away with competence. We just want loyalists, right? And I would go so far as to say that the new strategy of only hiring loyalists who also happen to be unbelievably incompetent has yielded some interesting results, because when you have a guy like Kash Patel run the FBI, sure, on the one hand, you definitely maintain control over the FBI. There's no leakers or whatever. But then the FBI's function as a federal law enforcement arm has diminished its credibility, because the guy who's running the department, and this is a very important department, it's a part of the federal law enforcement apparatus, is now constantly getting himself into trouble. He's constantly using private jets to fly around with his girlfriend, with his country music star girlfriend. He's a bit of a showboat. He's a drunkard, and people internally in the FBI are very frustrated that this organization is now run by an incompetent moron. There's other issues. And then you see things like the Charlie Kirk assassination attempt, or the Charlie Kirk assassination story. Sorry, not attempt. The attempt at at putting forward a competent investigation and how it fell apart. The Nancy Guthrie story, the kidnapping. Like there has been a sequence of high profile fuck ups. This leads to the public broadly losing confidence in federal law enforcement, and you can't have that. That will have very negative downstream consequences, because at the end of the day, you have to trust these institutions, right? You have to trust these institutions. The public has to trust these institutions. And if they can't trust these institutions any longer, well, you're going to see a lot of issues. There's going to be chaos, a lot of instability. In any case, let's get back to the factional infighting within the intelligence community and the possible veracity of the assassination intelligence that Donald Trump received from Israel.
Now, some officials were reportedly skeptical of that Israeli intelligence, which was viewed as part of Israel's effort to influence President Trump's decision-making on Iran. Joining us now, John Hudson, national security reporter for The Washington Post, who, of course, has been digging up so many of these important new details on the president's cloak and dagger flight. And you have a new byline out this morning, along with your colleagues, that the CIA specifically had low confidence, right? We talked about questions at the time in this intel coming from Israel, whether it was perhaps being used to try to influence President Trump's thinking. What did you learn about the CIA's take?
Yeah, there was a significant degree of skepticism by the CIA in the veracity. There was low confidence in the information that the Israelis passed along about the degree of the threat facing the president. There was concern that the information may have been more intended to manipulate the U.S. policy making rather than inform U.S. policy making. Obviously, it's a bit extraordinary to see the contrast with the level of confidence that U.S. intelligence officials had about this threat. And
I think a real question that people should ask themselves is, why does Israel get to manipulate American foreign policy in this insidious way for self-serving interests? You have to ask this question. I mean, the fact that the CNN is covering it like this is important. Why does Israel get to freak Trump out with not so credible information when Donald Trump is trying to deal with Iran, when Trump's negotiators are trying to deal with Iran, and Israel gets to go directly to Donald Trump and say, hey, these guys that you're trying to cut a deal with currently, that we want to destroy, this country that we want to destroy is Israel, because we find them to be our number one threat to Israeli primacy in the region, number one threat to the greater Israel project in the region, because it can create an active military deterrent. Those guys actually want to kill you. You shouldn't deal with them. You should go and blow them up instead. Even if you don't have the military capabilities of fighting against this country now, fighting against this force, and even if you don't have the military capabilities of defending against their attacks on U.S. bases, U.S. allies, U.S. assets in the region, you should still go to war with them instead. You should burn through, you should empty out your magazine, you should empty it out on Iran. Fuck it, who cares?
Degree of caution exercised by the Secret Service in response to this threat. In some ways, that this just shows that the Secret Service does have a different risk calculus that it has to deal with. There's no room for error. There were 3 very high-profile near-miss assassination attempts against the president, and they didn't want to leave anything up for chance here. Now, at the same time, you have to look at what was the incoming threat that was being reported by a top U.S. ally in the Middle East. And that's where the U.S. intelligence officials broad a degree of skepticism. They have a long history of processing and analyzing information that comes in from Israel. They don't accept everything at face value. So they provided some context to U.S. officials about this during this Ankara summit that was happening.
As you're, and your excellent reporting on this story, as you're digging in on this, there were some comments from the president, I believe it was on Tuesday, that certainly raised some eyebrows. He talked about and I'm paraphrasing him here, but the flight that he ultimately ended up on, that was actually at greater risk because he was on the flight. Have you found any evidence that?
That's incredible. What a Trumpian way to restore his bravado, his masculinity. It's like, oh, I was just saving their lives. That's why I secretly got on the other plane. Yeah, no, I'm the hero here. I'm not the panicked little scaredy cat who ran away and used the entire White House press pool and also some of my top advisors as bait for possible Iranian man pads that were snuck in to the through the Iranian-Turkish border. They're not I didn't just escape in a decoy plane in secrecy. I actually was taking a bullet again.
The Iranians knew that someone else who may have wanted to harm the president knew that he was on that flight at the time?
No, we haven't. No, and
no.
And in fact, I mean, this was
no. He's like, no. Nope, nobody knew.
Extraordinary level of secrecy. Even there were a number of White House officials that had no idea, that they assumed that they were on the plane that the president was, and as we know, he was actually secretly smuggled to a third plane on a Turkish catering truck. So the idea that the Iranians knew that. I haven't seen anything that led to this. This is one of the most successfully kept secrets until the Washington Post ripped the lid off the story this week.
Yeah, absolutely. John, I really appreciate you joining us this morning. Thank you.
So, Colonel Layton, I want to play what President Trump recently said about this.
Why was it too dangerous for you to fly on Air Force One, but not
I don't know.
too dangerous
I
for the
think
press?
actually the plane that I flew on was at greater risk. I think it was at greater risk because that would be the plane I think that they would be more likely to go for.
What's your assessment of the president's statement there?
Well, first of all, Pam, the aircraft that is protected, at least in terms of its own resources, is the Air Force One aircraft, the original Air Force One aircraft. The Qatari Air Force One aircraft has some capabilities that to protect it as well. And in terms of those capabilities, the 757 equivalent that he got on does not have the same types of safety measures that the Air Force One has, and that originally built into the Air Force One airframe. But on the one hand, so from that standpoint, he's correct that the aircraft is not as safe as the other one. But the issue here is that was an aircraft that was not really targeted. According to these reports, the Air Force One aircraft is the one that was targeted, and probably both Air Force Ones. And this one would be a safer aircraft to be on.
By the way, this is twofold. Not only does this get to play a role, I forgot to even mention this part. Not only does this get to play a role in Trump's attitude towards Iran, his willingness to possibly deal with them, but it also causes Donald Trump to reconsider how secure Turkey is. It causes Donald Trump to reconsider how much he can trust Turkey. So that's the other side of the story as well, because Israel is not only obviously interested in waging war with Iran, destroying the MOU, destroying any attempts at a ceasefire negotiation, but Israel also wants Donald Trump to hate Turkey. Israel wants Donald Trump to not give Turkey the F-35 fighter jets. Israel obviously sees Turkey as a significant threat, also vying for American attention, also vying for more power in the region. And Turkey has obviously delivered a massive W to American ambitions in the region with its actions in Syria, right? Israel sees this as a major threat to their ambitions in the region. And of course, that's why they've been pretty open about how Turkey is the next Iran, how once we're done with Iran, we're going to move to Turkey. We're going to destroy Turkey. So that's also something to consider. That's definitely something to consider here. I forgot to mention that element as well, especially because Erdogan likes Donald Trump, and Donald Trump likes Erdogan and sees him as a valuable asset for American ambitions in the region.
Given the circumstances of of the intelligence that we're hearing about now.
So to be clear, if there was a credible threat, why was a decoy aircraft carrying reporters, staff, and senior officials, including members of the cabinet and the presidential line of succession, allowed to fly?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what they were trying to do was they were trying to make things seem as normal as possible on the tarmac in Ankara, so they would not have a major gaggle of people, let's say, leaving one aircraft and going to another aircraft, making potentially that other aircraft more vulnerable at that point. So when you look at the way in which they did this, what they're trying to do is make operations seem as normal as possible on the tarmac at the airport there. But they were trying to protect the president and move him into another place. Now, of course, that puts reporters at risk and it puts senior staff at risk, and that at least potentially, and that, of course, is a real issue in this particular case. In essence, they didn't have really good alternatives to come up with in this very short period of time, given the fact that they assessed this information at least to be actionable, if not necessarily credible.
So, Brian, I understand that members of the White House press corps who travel with the president are voicing their concerns to the administration about this. What more can you tell us about that?
Right. They're asking for a protocol for any future events like this, any extraordinary security measures that are taken. It's important to have a protocol in place so the journalists do know what actually happened and where the president actually was at all times. So there was a meeting between the head of the White House Correspondents Association and Trump aides earlier this week. These concerns were outlined, and there's been no response from the White House yet. This is ultimately about credibility, both the White House's credibility and the press corps' credibility. This all started with a lie. It was the president's lie where he said, I'm going to send the new Qatari gifted Air Force One over to the UK because all the service members want to see it. He's the one who alerted the world that something unusual was going on with his travel plans. And then hours later, we believed he was taking off on that other or older Air Force One. So Trump started with a lie, then people inside the government leaked the truth about the security concerns, right? We found out part of the story in July. Then the
intelligence community knew there wasn't a threat that was credible, but still thought it would be funny to put Trump in a food trunk. That's my headcanon as well. They were like, we're going to put him in with the Turkish kebabs through the pipe. Mr. President, you have to go through the machine. You have to go through the contraption with the kebabs, with the doner kebabs.
Leaks continued. Someone tipped off the Washington Post. Now maybe we've learned the full truth about just how serious this was. But Trump is still repeating the lie that this was all about troops wanting to see his new Air Force One from Qatar. The lie's been exposed. The truth has been revealed. So oddly, Pam, it's an example of the system working, right? Sources inside the government thought the public was being deceived by the president. They thought the truth should come out about the deception, and now we know the truth. But it reminds me of an even greater deception that we've all been seeing in recent months. Trump has claimed that Iran has been completely defeated. He said on Fox News on July 13th, 5 days after he had to switch planes, he said on Fox News, quote, they got nothing. They have no Navy. They have no Air Force. It's all gone. Their anti-aircraft is gone. That was the president's narrative about Iran only 5 days after this security concern. So I think the true meaning of this story 1 month later, Pam, is that it contradicts the president's narrative about the war with Iran.
And that's why we always have to be asking questions as reporters. Kevin, I know you've been asking a lot of these questions. Do we have a clear understanding of which administration officials were and were not aware of the president's plane switch and the security threat here?
Well, it was a small group. The two cabinet secretaries who stayed behind on that old Air Force One, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, they were aware that President Trump was not on that plane. They had been involved in the planning in the hours beforehand of this deception ruse to get the president off. So they knew that he wasn't on the plane. In terms of some of the other staff members on the plane, and on Air Force One, it's a pretty wide wide swath of people who travel. It's the most senior aides, but you also have military officials, the stewards who work on the plane itself, members of the press, Secret Service, agents. So there's a wide variety of people who ride on that plane. And certainly not all of them were aware that this was happening. And you see in the video staff and press coming up the back stairs of the plane after the president has gotten on. And we know from the video that as they are boarding, the president is on the other side of the plane, heading out that exit door and into the catering container to go across the tarmac. He was joined in there by those two close personal aides of.
I'm not trying to be crass or dismissive when I ask this, but why is this a relevant story? Do people actually care about this stuff, or is it just an easy way to sow a bit of additional distrust in the admin to liberals? Yes. Also, I need to do more coverage on like lib slop, as I like to call it, as well, because my commentary has revolved, I think, too much around just the attacks that I've been receiving for the past week. And this is lib slop to a certain degree, and it's important for us to cover a little bit of lib slop. You know, we got to do some Midas touch headlines. We got to do a little bit of David Pakman, like, did the president shit in his diapers? Is the president having sex with his, diaper carrier? That sort of stuff is very important for us to bring liberals back to the fold. You know, there's been too much Hasan heavy coverage, and there's also been too much coverage around democratic socialism, things like that, and liberals. You know, they like it. They're fascinated by that, but the broad liberal movement demands more Trump slop.
Natalie Harp and Walt.
Also, it just makes Trump look like a pussy, which is awesome. You know what I mean? It's just like this is the type of commentary that Trump hates the most. You call him a violent monster every day, he doesn't care, because that makes him seem like he's he's this strong guy, big tough strong guy. This, on the other hand, makes him look like a weak little baby, like a coward, like the type of coward that the type of coward that would put men and women in the White House press corps in harm's way as he just gets on a separate flight. It could have been a disaster, right? At least from his calculation, from his perspective, he thought it was serious enough of a threat to escape through the food hatch with my little donor kebab.
I've been talking to White House officials. They don't necessarily think that that's a huge surprise. Those two accompany him virtually everywhere he goes. And so they were obviously in on the plot as well.
When the president was in Turkey and there were threats from Iran, instead of Air Force One, he was switched to another plane. And you've been talking about this online. And, everyone's being really glib. They're just sort of like, he's in the truck. That's so funny. But it seems to me like, are there other options? Could they have grounded the plane without everybody knowing what was going on? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how do you balance the security and the reality of all the people that were still on that flight?
Look, my viewpoint is you can at least read in the press and your staff, right? You could let them know what's going on. So I've heard some that defend this, and I understand you've got to save the president's life, but some are saying, well, Bill Clinton in Pakistan, 1991, a similar thing happened, but actually the press and his staff was read in on it. They knew it, right?
By read in, you just mean, hey guys, you're pulling the shades down because there's a threat.
That's what's happening.
Not because it's kind of hot in here.
Yeah,
don't worry about
right,
it.
exactly. And so I think that's where the press has a right to be upset. If they were on that plane, they were basically made to be, in essence, bait.
This is also like a very self-interested press story. The press loves talking about instances where their lives are, in imminent danger. This is like a cool story for them too. I think the American public broadly doesn't care. And that's the other reason why this is like really, they're really motivated to cover it.
I wonder Or if the staff was upset and that's why it got to the press. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Like there were some people who were like, wait, what? Like we were all left behind as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's a trust that has to be brokered. And whenever the press is traveling with the president, they want to know that the government is doing their best to protect
No, I mean
them.
White House staff.
Same
Were
thing
there
with the White
people
House
who were
staff.
just-
It's the same thing. If
Okay.
you're going to be traveling with the White House, you want to know that the bosses are there to protect you. And if that trust is broken,
Ooh, shaking their
if
head.
that trust is broken, why are you going to agree to confuse?
That's not what you signed up for.
Your job is, I mean, I was told straight up, and I hate to be so crass, you're to die in place. If there is a threat against the president, they save him, and you're behind.
Wait,
I went
but
on
wouldn't you
every
wanna
single
know?
trip.
Wouldn't
No,
you
I
wanna
went on
know?
every single
No.
trip with the president, foreign and domestic, when I worked in the White House. I do think that they needed to tell the press to read the press, and I went to war zones with him. We did read one person in, et cetera. Like, there's a way to do it to make sure that the press is covered, to make sure we're having a conversation with government.
Every time you got into a motorcade, you were under threat.
Yeah,
every movement of the president,
single
you
time.
are under threat, and you know that taking the job.
Here's the worst part, though, is everything leading up to this moment was a lie. Every explanation.
That's a different story.
Everything.
That's a different story than
If you
reading
want me
it.
to
I
be
mean,
glib about this, Taylor Swift is still lying about getting
not the president of the United States.
in a popcorn cart going into Arrowhead Stadium.
Yeah,
well, if we make her president, that'll be
I think
a
just
thing.
the fact that this administration was subpoenaing reporters about trying to do coverage of this, they were trying actively, as it appeared, to subdue reports about this and make it seem like it wasn't that bad. So then when people find out a couple weeks later that it was that bad, that's where there's the real trust.
But that's a different conversation than reading staff and press. And they definitely absolutely should have read the Correspondents Association. And I worked in that job. I was the one who had to read them, and I totally understand that and appreciate that. But there is a difference when you take these White House jobs at what's at risk here and what you're like. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in, and the President of the United States, regardless of party, is always a target, and you are a target in the motorcade as well.
Look at this bipartisanship.
I know. Y'all are right or
A shocking new report.
She said, suck it up. I told you saw Taylor do it and thought it was cool. I mean, CNN at this point is just like all conservatives. Like every panelist is a conservative, including the ones who claim to be Democratic Party loyalists, Democratic Party consultants. Like virtually every single person on every single panel is just like, yeah, I think Trump is pretty cool for doing this, actually. I think journalists should probably die on that flight. And it would be a real valid sacrifice, a sacrifice that Trump was willing to make, a sacrifice that I'm willing to make on this CNN panel. And it's fucking nuts. Yeah, she literally did the line like, some of you may die, but that's a sacrifice Trump's willing to make, and I'm willing to abide by. Cool stuff.